Good morning. Mr. Castleton.
My pleasure, Honour. Your Honour, this is the inquiry into the cause and origin of the Karai Creek and Karai East bushfires. These fires take their names from their area of origin, namely Karai and the creek that runs through the conservation area east of the Macleay River in the Oxley Wild Rivers National Park. The Karai East fire was made up of several fires and is known to many as the Jacob's Spur or Turumbi Complex Fire. The Karai Creek fire burnt in the Armidale local government area, encompassed within the lands of the Anawan people. This area of New South Wales lies about 58 kilometres south-east of Armidale as the crow flies. About 10 kilometres further east, the Kempsey local government area begins. The Karai East fire burnt in the Kempsey local government area, encompassed within the lands of the Dunghutti people. The Karai Creek fire burned a total of 238,601,000 hectares, comprising approximately 160,000 hectares of national park, 61,200 hectares of private land, 15,300 hectares of state forest, and 1,800 hectares of other property. The Karai East fire, made up of a number of fires that burned in the Kempsey local government area, destroyed a total area of 150,755 hectares comprising private property, state forest and national park. Owing to the way the fires were managed, some of the area burned may overlap. I will return to this aspect shortly, Your Honour. These fires damaged or destroyed at least 90 homes and around a further 250 outbuildings. It is notable and indeed praiseworthy that local residents and firefighters were able to save 442 homes in the Kempsey local government area. Sadly, Your Honour, Barry Parsons died in connection with the Karai East fire, and Your Honour will be conducting an inquest to determine the manner and cause of his death tomorrow. Today, Your Honour will hear oral evidence from the officer in charge of the investigation into the Karai Creek fire, Detective Senior Constable Mark Simmons. Your Honour will also hear the account of civilian witness David Duff, who defended his home from the Karai East fire. Your Honour will also have the benefit of the documents in the brief of evidence to be tendered shortly, containing witness accounts of the hours leading up to and shortly after the first sighting of fire. It also contains records regarding the spread and progression of the fire. The court's focus in the Northern Region hearings will be on evidence as to the cause and origin of this and other fires across northern New South Wales over the 2019-2020 bushfire season. Any broader issues that are raised in this matter may be the subject of case studies that are explored during the further hearing that is scheduled later this year. If it's convenient, Your Honour, I now turn to cause and origin. The Karai Creek fire is believed to have commenced on 16 October 2019 in the vicinity of Karai Creek, west of the Karai Plateau and east of the Macleay River. The point of origin is believed to be south of an area known as East Kundarang and west of Mary's View. And I'll just have displayed now, Your Honour, some photographs. These photographs show, Your Honour, the topography and dramatic scenery of that area of the state. And I'll just have displayed now, Your Honour, a map which is found in the Karai Creek brief of evidence at page 50. Your Honour, this map identifies the area of origin, and Your Honour will see it is mostly steep, mountainous bushland with a small amount of flat river country. And Your Honour, it may be hard to see, but some relevant points of interest obviously includes the red pinpoint, which is the area of origin, but Your Honour sees to the right of that, or to the east, the township of Brook, and then south of Brook, Your Honour, will see Hickey's Creek, directly south to Ruka, where Mr Duff resides. He'll be called later today. And then Your Honour sees the Karai National Park the castles further south, Willy National Park. The precise area of origin, Your Honour, could not be located owing to the inaccessible terrain, fire-affected roads and active fire in the area. A scene examination was not able to be conducted by a fire investigator for the Karai Creek fire. As such, the red pin on that image that Your Honour saw a moment ago identifies the point of origin based on GPS coordinates obtained by the officer in charge of the location where the fire is believed to have started. The cause of the Karai Creek fire is believed to have been 2 lightning strikes recorded in the area of origin on 16 October 2019. And Your Honour will see in this map, which is found at page 108 of the brief, shows the lightning strikes recorded in the vicinity of the Cairo Creek fire from 11 a.m. on 16 October to 11 a.m. on 17 October 2019. Now, it's hard to see, Your Honour, but Your Honour will see that there are 2 lightning strikes, one ending in 514, which is near to the words Karai Creek in the orange shaded area, near to where the cursor is. And then, Your Honour, if Your Honour tracks southeast of that point, Your Honour sees a lightning strike ending with the figure 64, which is down to the right-hand side. If we've got the cursor, and just there where the cursor is the second lightning strike. The Karai Creek fire, Your Honour, was authorised as going at 11:38 a.m. on 17 October 2019. The situation report dated 3:21 p.m. on 17 October records that there were no fire crews on site or available to provide information, and within the next 24 hours, a mapping update clarified that the very southwest of the fire was actually further east than that shown on the map to which I've just shown, Your Honour. At this time, one of the fires had burned approximately 36 hectares and the other 28 hectares. The next day, these 2 areas of fire would coalesce and become known as the Karai Creek fire. I'll just have shown now, Your Honour, some aerial images which are found at page 203 and 204 of the brief. These aerial images, Your Honour, show the extent of the fire later that afternoon, that is 17 October at 5 p.m. And Your Honour gets a perspective of the terrain and the topography from those aerial images. The next image, Your Honour, is found at page 98 of the brief of evidence. And this image, Your Honour, should give Your Honour a better sense of the terrain in the area and the scale of the fire at that time in the afternoon of the 17th of October. Lightning to the west of Kempsey was also recorded on the 16th of October 2019 and is believed to have caused another fire southeast of the Karai Creek fire. This was the Jacob Spur fire. And I'll just have displayed, Your Honour, page 68 of the brief of evidence, which is a map that shows the approximate area of origin of the Jacob Spur fire. As Your Honour will see, it too commenced in remote terrain that is inaccessible by foot. Similarly to Karai Creek, a fire investigator was unable to attend the scene of the fire to conduct a cause and origin investigation. The next image, Your Honour, is a map which is found at page 101 of the brief of evidence, and that should hopefully display the lightning activity recorded in the vicinity of Jacob Spur. So Your Honour sees that there's wide-ranging lightning strike data recorded on this image, and that's for the period 11 a.m. on 16 October to 11 a.m. on 17 October. As Your Honour can see, there is a lightning strike within the mapped area of the Jacob Spur fire. This map also illustrates the terrain within which the fire originated, and that's the lightning strike is the one that ends in 420 in the orange shaded area. Your Honour, the Jacob Spur fire was authorised as going at 1:38 p.m. on the 17th of October 2019. And I'll just have now displayed a further aerial image. This shows the Jacob Spur fire, Your Honour, at 1:39 p.m. that day, the 17th of October. The legal representatives of the Rural Fire Service have informed those assisting, Your Honour, that this fire was managed as a Class 2 fire until 26 October 2019, when it came within the Section 44 declaration for the Kempsey and Nambucca local government areas. And I'll return to that matter shortly, Your Honour. At this point, Your Honour, I note certain ambiguities in the briefs of evidence relating to the Karai Creek and the Karai East fires, possibly due to the naming conventions that were adopted or the way the fires were managed. The officer in charge of the investigation into the cause and origin of the Karai Creek fire states that the Jacob Spur fire became known as the Karai East fire when it moved into the Kempsey local government area. The incident controller and the former officer in charge of the investigation into the cause and origin of the Karai East fire dealt with the Karai East fire and the Jacob Spur fires as separate fires. For example, the incident controller's report states that the Karai East fire gained significant momentum in the lead up to the 8th of November 2019, on which date it merged with the Jacob Spurs fire. These references are not inconsistent with the understanding of those assisting, Your Honour. At this point, I'll have my instructing solicitor display a map of the relevant local government areas in respect of each of these fires. Now, Your Honour, the red, firstly, this is a map that's been obtained from the Office of Local Government website. The red lines, Your Honour, show the local government area boundaries. To the northwest, Your Honour will see the Armidale local government area. The large area in the centre, southeast, is the Kempsey local government area, and that's where Your Honour sees Brook, Willa, Warren, and indeed Kempsey. The local government area to the southwest is Walker, and to the northeast is Nambucca. The Cairo National Park is situated at the southeast corner of the Armidale local government area, bordering the Kempsey local government area. Kempsey is, as you can see, is to the east on Armidale Road, and to the northwest, Your Honour will see Willa Warren, and further along Armidale Road, Your Honour will see Brook. The river that follows the Armidale Road is the Macleay River, and Your Honour then sees Stockyard Creek. It's the faint blue squiggly line that runs from the Macleay River to the north, east of the Karai State Conservation Area in the centre of the map, and south towards the Castles Nature Reserve. Your Honour, I set this out to simply clarify the following. The area of the Karai Creek fire that remained on the western side of Stockyard Creek remained under the control of the Armidale Glen Ennis Section 44 declaration. This area of fire was known and remained known as the Karai Creek fire. The Jacob Spur fire was managed as a Class 2 fire until 26 October 2019, when it came within the Kempsey Nambucca Section 44 declaration. On 8 November 2019, the Jacob Spur fire would eventually merge with another fire known as the Armidale Road fire, and together they became known as the Turumbi Complex fire. This fire came within the Kempsey Nambucca Section 44 declaration. Also on 8 November 2019, the areas of the Karai Creek fire that had spread east and entered the Kempsey local government area were managed and mapped as part of the Turumbi Complex fire. On 9 November, another fire known as the Anderson Road fire had merged with the Turumbi Complex fire. On 11 November 2019, the Turumbi Complex fire was renamed Karai East. That same day, a third fire, the 5-day Creek fire, had also merged with the Karai East fire. As such, Your Honour, 4 separate fires came to form part of the complex known as the Karai East Fire. Turning now to fire progression and its impact. In the beginning, both the Karai Creek and the Karai East fires were burning at a steady pace and were mapped as spreading short distances in various directions. However, steep terrain and dry conditions made initial containment difficult. The incident controller states that the opportunities to hold the fires using soft containment strategies were limited and hard containment options were used. There was also very little impact from previous fire activity, such as hazard reduction, that could assist with fighting the Karai Creek and Karai East fires. I'll just have now displayed, Your Honour, some maps. These maps, Your Honour, show the location of both fires as at 18 October 2019 and also 20 October 2019. Your Honour will see relatively little fire spread over those few days. At this time, Your Honour, resources were stretched across the entire northeast of the state. Your Honour may recall hearings over the last 2 weeks that among other fires, the Bees Nest, Busby's Flat, Long Gully Road, Mile Creek Road and Cayenne Road fires were all burning in northern New South Wales at that time. Aerial support was provided to ground crews where possible, but poor weather conditions and the need for resources elsewhere, especially the Bees Nest fire, meant that aerial support was limited. Crews from the RFS and National Parks and Wildlife Service worked to contain the fire along with private landowners. In the meantime, on 24 October, discussions were taking place as to whether to set up a new incident management team. A decision was made that the Armidale Fire Control Centre was not suitable and it was agreed to remain at Glen Innes. At 3 p.m. on 26 October, a further Section 44 declaration was made in respect of the Kempsey and Nambucca local government areas. As I mentioned earlier, this meant that Jacob's Spur fire would now come within that Section 44 declaration. At page 55 of the brief of evidence, Your Honour will see an aerial image. By 1 November, the Karai Creek fire had covered most of the Karai Plateau and had moved outward in all directions, crossing the Macleay River to the north and travelling east towards Bellbrook and Willy Willy and south towards Yarrowitch. The fire was mapped as spreading up to 2 kilometres in various directions, whilst the Jacob's Spur fire was mapped as spreading shorter distances of up to 1 kilometre. It was against this background that firefighters and locals alike confronted the treacherous fire weather conditions that came on 7 and 8 November. Daily weather observations at Kempsey show the maximum temperature on 7 November reached 40 degrees Celsius, with variable wind coming from the northeast at 9 a.m, the west at 11:30 a.m, and the southeast at 3 p.m. The maximum wind gusts reached 57 kilometres per hour. On 8 November, temperatures peaked at 29 degrees at Kempsey Airport, with strong winds from the south-southeast, gusting up to 41 kilometres per hour. At page 57 of the brief of evidence, Your Honour will see a map which shows the extent of the Karai Creek fire as at 7 November, the bulk of which is shaded in green. Your Honour sees the purple shaded area to the east or to the right. This is the Jacob's Spur fire. On this next map, Your Honour will see the spread of the fire by just the morning of the 8th of November. At this point, the Karai Creek fire had moved into the Kempsey local government area and was being managed as part of the Turumbi complex fire, shown here as the Jacob's Spur fire, shaded in the blue to the east, and the Stockyard Flat fire shaded in grey to the south. And Your Honour will also see in the top right-hand corner to the north-east Cayenne Road, which Your Honour inquired to last week. The 8th of November, Your Honour, was the day that the Cairo East fire would tragically claim the life of Barry Parsons. David Duff, who lives at Taruka with his wife Carolyn, has provided a statement containing his account of the events of 8 November. He states that they were notified through text or through the Fires Near Me application of an approaching fire, which could become a threat. Carolyn, David's wife, later received 4 emergency alerts from the RFS. One was timestamped at 9:36 p.m. on 7 November and 3 more on 8 November at 12:20 p.m, 2:21 p.m. and 6:37 p.m. At about 3:35 p.m. on 8 November, Mr Duff states he noticed smoke coming from Willa Warren, which he thought was strange as the main fire front had yet to arrive from the west. He thought the embers must have gone over their house and hit Willa Warren. He began wetting down sheds and their house, but by 4:50 p.m, the fire front had arrived. He described it as a firestorm, saying it was like the air had caught fire. It was raining fire. His wife focused on saving their house, but it was difficult to breathe, and when sparks hit the ground, a fire would start. Fence posts, grass and trees were catching fire everywhere. Mr Duff states that the fire was particularly intense for about 20 minutes, and after that he and his wife continued fighting the fire until 2 a.m. the following morning. 2 crews from the National Parks and Wildlife Service arrived at 5:30 p.m. on the 8th of November to assist and help save their house for a little while, after which Mr Duff asked one of them to go and help others in the area. Mr Duff was admitted to hospital with breathing difficulties. Elsewhere, that same afternoon, that is the 8th of November, the captain of the Brook RFS Brigade, Gerard Wade, a long-time resident of Brook, was responding to a 000 call from a local resident whose property was being impacted by fire. He and his crew arrived at the property at about 3 p.m. on the 8th of November. Around that time, he saw the Karai Creek fire, which appeared to be approaching from the south. He describes what he saw as a purple firestorm with a front about 3 kilometres wide with a large pyrocumulonimbus cloud above it. He recalls fighting the fire in the Brook area until 4 a.m. the following morning. 2 police officers, Senior Constable Tristan Membry and Senior Constable Lincoln Hudson, were also in Brook at this time, trying to evacuate residents. At about 8 p.m. that night, an RFS crew from Southwest Rocks, some distance away from Brook, was able to access Brook to assist. This was followed by another 3 RFS crews at about 1 a.m. Senior Constable Membry recalls the principal of the local school had opened the school to evacuees. Someone had done the same at the community hall across the road. Together they, along with the local pub, helped with people with food, drink and bedding, especially the elderly and the families with children. The fire would eventually surround the town, trapping locals overnight and cutting off power and phone services for 8 days. Thankfully, a wind change spared the town centre. Neil Booth, Your Honour, has also provided a statement which gives Your Honour an idea of how unpredictable the fire was with changing weather conditions. The Karai Creek fire moved through the eastern and northern sections of Mr Booth's property at Lower Creek, but he was able to install some containment lines and got through the worst of the weather on the 8th of November. On 9 November, weather conditions eased, or so he thought. He checked the tracks on the eastern side of his property and put out anything that was burning. He fed his cattle and pulled a couple of cows out of a dam. The cows had got stuck in the mud at the bottom of the dam because it was almost empty. Once everything looked contained, he went to help others prepare for the fire. It wasn't until he reached his neighbour's house that he noticed smoke coming from his property. When he got back home, he saw the fire burning at the northeast corner of his house. He went to find water, but the fire had already burned the pipe from the water tank, so he had no way to access the water. He could not start his generator or the water pumps because he had run out of petrol. Mr. Booth states that he was stressed and panicking a bit and didn't know what to do. He went to turn the power off but could not get near the meter box because of the fire. He ran inside to get an armful of clothes, some paperwork, photographs and other supplies. At that point, other people arrived to help, but it was too late. They all had to retreat to the road. Mr. Booth states it would have been about 15 minutes before the whole house was fully alight. Your Honour will see 3 photographs displayed shortly that shows the fire impacting Mr. Booth's home on that day in November 2019. The Carai Creek fire, Your Honour, was finally declared out on 15 January 2020, and the Carai East fire several days later on the 19th of January 2020. The map, Your Honour, which is found at page 129 of the brief of evidence, shows the total area burned by these 2 fires. The Carai Creek fire, Your Honour, is shaded in yellow, and the Carai East fire, Your Honour, is shaded in orange. Your Honour will see what a significant area of land these fires impacted. It's remarkable, Your Honour, that only one life was lost when one has regard to the matters contained within the brief, and indeed when one sees the spread of these particular fires. Your Honour, if it's convenient, I propose now to tender the brief of evidence of the inquiry into the Carai Creek fire, which I understand will become Exhibit 40A.
Yes, Exhibit 40A.
40A, and in respect of the Carai East fire inquiry, I tender the brief in that matter, which I understand will become Exhibit 41A.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Castleton. That'll be Exhibit 41A.
Please, Your Honour. The first witness this morning is the officer in charge of the investigation into the Carai Creek fire. I understand that Detective Senior Constable Mark Simmons is in the virtual waiting room. Before he's brought in, Your Honour, can I just deal with one final procedure matter, which is to invite Your Honour to make an interim order that the evidence tendered in each of the Northern Region inquiries and inquests referred to in Schedule A be evidence in all of the other proceedings. And Schedule A deals with the Carai Creek, the Carai East fires, and the inquest into the death of Barry Parsons, which Your Honour will hear tomorrow.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Newton, are you aware of this proposed order?
Yes, Your Honour, and no objection.
Yes, thank you. I make that order now. Thank you. Detective, can you see and hear us in the courtroom?
Yes, Your Honour, I can.
Thank you. We'll just hear from the court officer now.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you.
Detective, would you please state your full name?
It's Mark Simmons, Simmons spelled S-Y-M-O-N-S.
And what is your present rank?
Detective Senior Constable.
And are you stationed at the Armidale station within New South Wales Police?
That's correct. I've been in Armidale 11 years.
And Detective, were you tasked to investigate the cause and origin of the Carai Creek fire?
Yes, I was.
And have you provided in relation to your investigation 2 statements. The first signed by you on the 30th of October 2020.
Correct, yes.
And do you have a copy of that statement with you this morning?
Yes, I do.
Are there any matters that require correction in respect of that statement, Detective?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And have you provided a further statement signed by you on the 20th of November 2020 in relation to the Karai Creek fire?
That's correct, yes.
And do you have a copy of that statement with you this morning?
I do, yes.
And are there any matters that require correction within that statement, to your
No.
knowledge?
No.
What I propose to do, Detective, is just to work through your first statement signed by you on the 30th of October 2020. And my first question is, at what time were you tasked with the investigation into the cause and origin of this particular fire?
The exact date, I'm not 100% sure. It may be in my statement. It was probably, it was in the months following the fires, early 2020. It was initially tasked to a different officer, but he subsequently left, and I took over from him. But that was within the first few months after the fire.
And you said a moment ago, Detective, that you've been stationed at Armidale for approximately 10 years.
That's right.
How familiar are you with the area between Armidale and Kempsey where this fire was thought to originate from?
Reasonably familiar with the area. I've travelled down there numerous times in a work capacity and also in a personal capacity, travelling through to Kempsey.
And taking your mind back, if one can, to those months leading up to October of 2019, how would you describe the weather conditions or the environmental conditions in and around the Karai Creek area? Was it dry? Was it?
Yeah, certainly dry. The main river through that area, or below the Cairo Plateau, the Macleay River, I believe it stopped flowing in some places. The conditions were extremely dry. It was drought conditions at the time. A lot of dry matter.
And do you know how long that area may have been in drought for prior to the ignition of the fire?
I believe 1 year to 2 years.
And in terms of the topography or the terrain, how would you describe the topography of that area around Karai Creek?
At the ignition point, or points, there's 2 initial points. It's fairly steep terrain, which leads up to what's known as the Karai Plateau, where it flattens out a little bit, but then it drops off again to the east, a steep sort of descending down to more river flats and flatter country down below.
I'll have displayed now for your assistance, Detective, image 1 of your statement, which is an aerial photograph of that area. Bear with us, it takes a while for these images to load onto the screen, but for your benefit, it's found at page 3 of your statement. It's also in a much larger state as the first annexure to your statement. Page 50 of the brief of evidence.
Yes, I can see that now.
Okay. Now you mentioned the Karai Plateau. If we use the red marker as a point of reference, where is the plateau known as the Karai Plateau?
So if you look directly to the right of where the red marker is, you'll see the word Carai.
Yes.
That area, that's a flatter area around there, which I would describe as the Carai Plateau. encompassing the Karai National Park below. And then you can see the sort of mountainous country drops off either side or around that.
And if we just scroll back out, I just wanted to get you to orient Lower Creek.
Yep, so Lower Creek's to the top and slightly to the right. It's a village, small village.
And just in terms of Lower Creek, you've described it as a small village. How many people lived in or near that village known as Lower Creek?
There would only be a handful of houses, I think, in the actual village itself, maybe a dozen to 15 houses, some of which are unoccupied and used as holiday homes. The exact population, I would have to look through my notes to confirm that. Certainly not a lot of people. And
at Lower Creek, were there any commercial premises such as shops or not?
No.
And so sorry to cut you off. Please go on, Detective.
No, that's okay. I think from memory, and it might be in my statement, I think Lower Creek is about 60 or 70 kilometres from the Cairo Plateau. However, you can't access it by road. In that direct manner, it's quite a long journey around back through Bellbrook to get to Lower Creek.
And you've mentioned Bellbrook, which is to the southeast of Lower Creek. Is the road that one sees between those two locations the Armadale-Kempsey Road?
That's correct, yes.
And is that a sealed road or not?
No, it's not. It's a dirt road.
And in terms of Bellbrook, what was the population of Bellbrook?
Again, I'll have to consult my notes. It'd be several. It's a much bigger town. There's a hotel and a store and so forth. There'd be several hundred people in Bellbrook. And just to confirm that the road is dirt until I think it's about 10 kilometres west of Bellbrook, and then it becomes sealed from there all the way into Kempsey. And
there was a small school at Bellbrook, was there in?
That's right.
November of 2019?
Yes.
And I'll just have my instructing solicitor zoom out so that we can try and pick up Willa Warren. Bear with us. Hopefully it's shown on that image. It may not be.
You can see it in the sort of the right-hand side in the middle there. Yeah.
Where the cursor is there.
That's right.
And do I understand your evidence correctly, between Willa Warren and perhaps 10 k's west of Bellbrook, it's sealed road?
Yeah, the Armadale-Kempsey Road's sealed in that stretch, yes.
And from your investigations, were each of those locations that we've just discussed, Lower Creek, Bellbrook and Willa Warren, affected by this fire known as the Carai fire, or later when they merged, the Carai East fire?
Yes, they were.
Now, if I go to the next image that's next to your statement, which is page 51 of the brief, and to assist you, Detective, it's page 4 of your statement. What does this map depict, or this image?
It's a representation of the lightning strike data. I believe it's a little bit blurry on my screen, but that was supplied to me by the fire service, Rural Fire Service.
Thank you. And just in terms of orientation, are you able to identify the Macleay River on that image?
Yes. Yes, it comes in on the left-hand side in the middle, flows across and then heads up the screen, and then sort of out of view a little bit at the top.
And in this image, do we see Stockyard Creek or not?
Yeah, I can't see. It may be sort of just at the bottom of the screen.
I'll have now displayed a further map which is found at page 108. Now, you may not have seen this map, Detective, and please let her on know if you have not.
Yes, I have seen that map before, yes.
Now, I'll just see if we can magnify that a little bit. As part of your investigation, did you come to learn that the most likely cause of the fire, which became known as the Karai Creek fire, was 2 lightning strikes?
That's right. 2 lightning strikes on the 16th in the evening, I believe somewhere around 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. On the 16th, and then they kicked off on the 17th. I think it was officially declared at about 11 a.m. on the 17th.
And I'll just have my instructing solicitor identify with the cursor the lightning strike that ends in the number 514, which is slightly to the right of Karai Creek. Is that one of the lightning strikes that you came to learn may have been responsible for this ignition?
That's correct, and that was the one I referred to mostly in my statement. It's just to the northwest of the locality of Mary's View, which you can access via road going through the Cairo Plateau to that area, where you can look to the west and see that ignition point. And then the other one is obviously further south and somewhat to the east. Was
That's
the other
the one that ends in the number 684.
That's correct. Yep, they both merged very quickly. I think the 514 probably spread initially a little bit quicker and joined into the bottom one.
And as part of your investigation, were you able to obtain a line scan that showed the evolution of those 2 fires, which is found at page 52 of the brief of evidence, which is, for your benefit, Detective, found at page 5?
Yes, that's correct.
And is that a line scan that was taken in the early evening on the 17th of October?
That's right, 1747, I believe.
5:47 p.m. on the 17th of October.
That's correct.
And Your Honour will see there the 2 fires which correlate with the lightning strike data in terms of one to the north and the other to the south. And did these 2 fires at some point merge, to your understanding, Detective?
That's right. I believe it's in my statement. I think it was the following day on the 18th. I believe they merged. It was very quick.
And I'll just bring up, before we get to that document, page 53 of the brief of evidence, which is an aerial photograph, which I understand you're able to obtain from RFS.
Yes, that, and I'm not sure, I may have referred to that as the top fire, but I believe that's the southern fire.
Yes.
And sort of in the foreground, you can see some smoke coming from the top fire. So that one you're looking at would be the, I can't read the number on my statement, but the more southern of the 2 fires.
And in terms of the direction, which direction are we looking
So we're
from the cockpit of the aircraft?
looking south, and the smoke is moving to the east.
To the east.
Rough.
Thank you. Now, at this point in time, about the 18th of October, 18 October, the fire is just contained within that rugged terrain that one sees in the photograph.
That's right.
And then I think you mentioned a moment ago that you, as part of your inquiries, came to learn that the 2 fires merged perhaps on the 18th of October. And did you obtain a line scan that shows those 2 fires merging? And that's found at page 58 of the brief of evidence, page 6 of your statement, if that assists, Detective.
Thank you. That's correct. Yep.
Now,
And that
when
was
that comes up on the screen, no, if we go to page 54, please. If my instructors could rotate that so it's in the right orientation. Now, Detective, one sees in this line scan or satellite image 2 fires. Is the one to the north or to the top of the image the Karai Creek fire, which has by the two emissions and the 2 fires have merged?
That's correct. Yes.
And one also sees to the south or to the bottom right a further smaller fire. Is it your understanding that became known as the Jacob Spur fire?
That's correct. Yes.
And that fire ultimately became known as the Cairo East fire when it merged with some other fires in the area?
Eventually, yes.
Now, in that period between 18 October to early November, are you able to describe what the response was by RFS or other agencies in relation to the fire?
I think that it's probably better for them to answer. There was a response. The brigades down there, Brook, Lower Creek. I assume Willa, that's just out of my area, but certainly the other brigades were active during that whole period. I know that Forestry had a presence there, National Parks had a presence there, so they were all on the ground fighting these fires for that whole period.
Now, you mentioned a second ago a particular area was out of your area. In terms of the remit of your investigation, what were the boundaries in terms of what you could investigate and when you had to hand over to someone else?
So for my investigation, because a part of the fire that I was initially looking at crossed over and progressed out of what our policing boundary would be, I still travelled down to Brook and across from Brook towards Willa, which is where I believe the fire tracked through the vicinity of Balls Road and some other roads in there. That is technically out of our policing boundary area. That boundary is between Lower Creek and Brook, is where we normally cover down to. But because this was the one fire and there was people down there that wanted to speak to me, and for completeness, I wanted to go through that area and see where the fire had been.
And in terms of the boundaries that you work within in terms of police districts or the extent of your area, was that similar for the RFS to your understanding in terms of naming conventions?
Yeah, it was. I don't know if the exact boundary lines are the same, but there is a division there. I believe the Lower Creek Fire Service was controlled by Glen Innes, where Brook was controlled by the Kempsey Fire Control Centre, or Mid-North Coast, I think it's called. So yeah, there's a definite difference in management of those areas for them as well.
I'll just have displayed, Detective, page 55 of the brief of evidence, which is an image that you've inserted in your statement, page 7, which is an aerial image taken on the 1st of November. And what does this depict, Detective?
So again, that's an aerial view of the majority of that Karai Plateau area, and it shows, how the fire has expanded at that point in basically all directions.
And do we see the Jacob Spur fire in this image or not?
I don't think so. No,
Well,
I
what we
think
see is just the Carai Creek fire.
yeah, that's right.
And one sees two hole punches. To the second of those, that is the one furthest to the right. Is that sort of the area around Lower Creek?
That's correct, yes.
And do we see the Macleay River snaking around in that top right-hand corner?
That's right.
I'll just then have brought up the next image, which is page 57, which is and following 57 to 58 and 59. Now, these are some fire progression maps you were able to obtain from RFS, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And is the one that's on the screen now for the period 7 November 2019?
Yes.
Now, did conditions change between the 7th of November and the 8th of November 2019 from your inquiries?
Certainly there was a large spread on the 8th of November, which should be shown in the next image. There was...
We'll go to that one now. So, Your Honour, for Your Honour's benefit, sees the progression of the fire as at the 7th of November, and now on this next image, Your Honour, is the progression the following day on the 8th of November. And if you're able to assist, Detective, are you able to identify on this fire progression map the Jacob Spur fire? Or are they all merged or nearly merged by this time?
Yeah, I think it's I think there had been some merging at the bottom. I don't know how to describe that. Where you can see Willy Road. I think the lighter blue shaded area to the left, so just to the left of that.
Yes.
I believe that was a part of the Jacob Spur, but I thought it had spread across from there as well. It's a little bit hard to see on that one.
Looking at the legend, the green is Carai Creek, is it not? And the area around the green is also Carai Creek. But as you've identified, that lighter shading of blue towards Willy Road is, according to the legend, Jacob Spur.
Jacob Spur, yeah. Yeah.
Or the Carai East fire.
And then the blue above that has come down from the top side of the Cairo East fire.
Yes. And then if we go to the next map, Your Honour, which is found at page 59, that shows the progression the following day, and Your Honour gets a sense of the area it's spread in that 24-hour period.
Yeah, so the majority of that occurred on the afternoon of the 8th, in that sort of few-hour period.
And what were the weather conditions like in that late afternoon, early evening on the 8th of November, Detective, do you recall?
Yeah, incredibly warm, low humidity, and I think a westerly, then a northwesterly wind, fairly strong. I do have that data in my statement, but exact temperatures I'm not quite sure. Certainly hot, dry, and windy. And
it was on this day, was it not, that it's believed that a resident around Bellbrook, Barry Parsons, may have died? Is that your understanding?
Resident near Willa, yes.
Sorry. And did you have any involvement in the investigation into Mr. Parsons' death or not?
No, I did not.
Now, in terms of the damage to property, as part of your investigation, did you canvass local residents
I did.
to ascertain the damage that they sustained to their property?
I did, and actually subsequent to the 8th, I was down in that area on the 9th and got to see firsthand a lot of the devastation.
And I just might have displayed now, for Her Honour's benefit, some photographs that you've included in your statement. They commence at page 60 of the brief of evidence, Your Honour, and run through to page 74. And I'll just have those displayed now. And Detective, I'll just get you to identify now, doing the best you can, where was that photograph taken?
Well, that was travelling down the Armadale-Kempsey Road, probably maybe 20 or 15 kilometres from Georges Creek, which is the sort of the bottom of the hill heading down to the river, the Macleay River, and then you travel from there across to Lower Creek. And
was this taken on the 9th of November or
no, on the 9th I had to go right round down through Bellingen and down the highway and then back in from Kempsey. This was a bit later when I went down to do to travel down to the house that had burnt down. So that was on the 13th of November.
Right, we'll move to the next photograph, which is 61 of the brief of evidence, Your Honour. And Detective, firstly, when was this photograph taken?
That was that same day. Sorry, no, that was the 6th of February, that one. That was on a return visit, conducting a survey of properties that we hadn't been able to get to until that point due to fires. And then after the fires, there was heavy rain and landslides and so forth.
In what location is this property? Is it on the Armadale-Kempsey Road or is it on another road?
That's a different road. That's on Petroy Road, which comes off Lower Creek Road, which comes off the Armadale-Kempsey Road.
And is it, in terms of Lower Creek, does it sit north of Lower Creek?
That's right.
All right. We'll just move through now to the next photograph, if we may, page 62. Was that also taken on the same day off at Petroy Road?
That's right. That's the same property.
And if we go to page 63, is that the same property or?
No, that's the same day, but that's a different property. That's
on Petroy Road?
It's on Petroy Road. It's number 275, Petroy Road.
And if we just jump to 65.
That one's number 277, Petroy Road.
And as part of your inquiries and investigations into property damage, Detective, did you distribute or circulate a questionnaire amongst residents in the area that was affected by the fire? I
did, yes.
And did you receive much of a response in relation to your questionnaire?
I did. They were attached to the brief of evidence, I believe. So some people I couldn't locate. Some people there was lock gates and no contact numbers. But there was a reasonable response, which enabled me to do a sort of estimate on the amount of damage.
And in terms of the damage, what was the estimate that you were able to do in terms of number of buildings that were destroyed or damaged?
There was a lot of buildings, like you can see in that picture, which was a shed and a caravan and some other infrastructure, motor vehicles. There was a complete house on the Armadale-Kempsey Road that was destroyed that had been renovated, 4-bedroom home. On top of that, there was obviously kilometres and kilometres of fencing and livestock and cattle yards, many different things. And the estimate in the end would have been several $1 million.
And as part of the questionnaires that you received back and from your inquiries with local residents, were there any reoccurring themes that emerged in terms of the locals as to the fire and what lessons could be learned in the future from their perspective?
Again, there were several that were raised that I've included in the statement. I guess management of national parks would have been one that was well talked about with all the residents down there. Different ideas about having clearer boundaries between private landholders and national parks. One of the common, I guess, issues raised was that the fire would burn in the national park, through the ridges, and the wind would change and then come down into private properties. They would stop it, then it would keep burning and then come back down and again from a different direction. And there was nothing that the private landholders could do to stop it, particularly if they weren't allowed to take their machinery into national parks to try and extend fire breaks and things like that. That was one of the issues raised. From the fire service, there was issues with communication raised by them, certainly communicating with each other and with other agencies, with the national parks. All that's been documented. And obviously another issue that was raised was the destocking of national parks and the appearance that there was a larger volume of matter in the parks because there'd been no stock grazing in there. That was sort of counteracted a little bit when I spoke to national parks. Their argument was that due to the climate conditions at the time, that it wouldn't have mattered as much if there had or had not have been stock in there. It was still dry, and the situation would have been the same. So there's a few different opinions that came out, and so I've gone into that a little bit more in my statement.
Just finally now, Detective, I'll just have displayed a photograph you took from Mary's view. It's page 69. And it's really to give Her Honour a better appreciation of how rugged the country is. And whilst that's coming up, Detective, do I understand correctly that no one was able to get into the likely area of origin because of the inaccessible terrain one would encounter to undertake that task?
Yeah, that's right. What you're looking at there, basically in the centre where you can see the river snaking around, that is the top ignition point, if you like, and that it probably doesn't look as steep as it is, but it drops off quite steeply just on the other side of that sign. You certainly can't walk down there. To get there, you probably would have had to try and canoe up the river, and it would have been very difficult. But certainly looking at that area and the fire damage that was there, still remaining there, that would have been the area of that ignition. And then I think there's another photo looking south, which would have been the point of ignition of the other one.
I'll see if we can bring that up. I think it might be page 70, which is the next photograph.
That's right. So that's looking sort of south, a little bit southwest, but sort of behind where the bushes are on that slope would have been roughly the second ignition.
Yes. Thank you, Detective. They're my questions, Your Honour.
Thank you, Mr. Castleton. Detective, if you just wouldn't mind waiting until I see if there's any questions from Mr. Newton of Council.
Yes, Your Honour.
Mr. Newton.
No questions.
Thanks very much, Detective. You're excused.
Thanks, Your Honour.
Thank you, Your Honour. The next witness is David Duff, who I understand is in the virtual waiting room. I call David Duff, D-U-F-F.
Mr. Duff, can you see and hear us in the courtroom?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Right.
Afternoon now.
Afternoon, it is too. You'll just hear from the court officer now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you, Mr. Duff.
Mr. Duff, would you please state your full name?
Yeah, David Neil Duff.
And what is your present address, please?
I live at Taruka at 102 Dowling Falls Road, 2440.
And are you working at the moment?
Yes, I'm self-employed. I work there in conjunction with my wife as a beef cattle operation and some cropping. So we're farmers.
And do you live on a property near Taruka?
Yes, the district's known as Taruka and the actual property that we live on is Taruka.
I'll just have displayed on the screen, Mr. Duff, a Google map, hopefully which shows the general area. If you see a red pinpoint, can you see that on your screen or not?
Yeah, I can. I just moved a bit closer. Yeah, that's approximately where it is, yes.
Okay. And does your property sit somewhere between Willa and Bellbrook to the west of the Armadale-Kempsey Road?
Yes.
And does part of your property have the Macleay River running through it or not?
Yes, so our property is approximately 2,500 acres, so we are bisected by the Macleay River. We have 700 acres on the northeastern side of the river and approximately 1,700 acres on the southwestern side.
And how long have you lived at your property, which is known as Taruka 4?
We've been on that property for approximately 30 years.
And in terms of the conditions leading up to October of 2019, how would you describe the conditions on the property? Were you in drought or not?
Oh yeah, look, we'd had probably 3 years preceding to that date where we'd been significantly reduced rainfall to the point of where we were drought declared towards the 6 months leading up to that date.
And in terms of your property, does it border any national parks or state forest or not?
No, that property doesn't, no.
And you've mentioned the Macleay River divides the property.
Yes.
Back in October of 2019, was there any water running through the river at that time, to your recollection, or not?
The river had stopped running in some places above the surface, but there were still pools of water in the system itself. So we weren't totally out of water, but significantly reduced amount of water.
In the 30 odd years that you'd been on the property, can you recall a time where the river was drier than what it was in October of 2019?
Back in the early 90s, it was similar, but I mean, it's not always the same, but that was probably the driest that I'd ever seen it, and the lack of flow.
And to give her on some perspective, you've had some recent rain up that way in the last few weeks. Is there water in the river now?
Yes, our river at a river gauge, which is in our property, the river reached something like a 7.5 metre rise from what's considered normal.
And so you've gone from October 2019 to very little water to now you're 7+ metres above the normal level.
Yes, that's right.
Now I just want to turn your mind to the ignition of the fire that you unfortunately had to deal with. What's your recollection of first being made aware that there was a fire in the area? Do you have a clear recollection today?
Well, really, I mean, there were dry storms in the area, probably about 6 weeks preceding the actual fire event that impacted on us. So you see smoke and, the evidence of fire in the district. When I say the district, I'm talking probably a 20 to 30 kilometre radius. And there were numerous lightning strikes or fires that I was told were the result of lightning strikes, you know, before that fire actually impacted on us. So yeah, we were aware that there were fires in the area.
And in terms of your preparedness for the fires, what, if anything, did you do in those weeks or days leading up to when the fire impacted your property? Did you prepare for?
Well, we're both fourth generation graziers, both our families, my wife and I. So at that time of the year when there's significantly less rainfall, it's a common practice for us to take what we consider necessary steps to manage our property. So we've done things like, when we knew that the fire had a possibility of coming to us, and the Jacobs Creek fire, we were notified about that probably 3 weeks in advance of the fire that actually hit us. So we'd done things like cleared bush tracks up with the dozer to give us some sort of a benefit as a fire break if we decided that that's what we needed to do to protect our property. We had done some reduction burning on one particular part of the property back in July, and that stayed totally within our property. And we would have liked to have done some more, but we were reprimanded over that by the RFS and weren't allowed to do any more. So, I mean, these things that I'm talking about are just normal, natural management things that we've done for generations to manage our land and to protect our business, really, and our livelihood, as well as our own lives. So we just did things like serviced up spray units on tractors and in vehicles so that we had water available if the fire impacted on the close proximity of our house and buildings and things. We moved stock from what we thought were probably more at-risk situations, moved them into other paddocks that we considered were less risk, and just general maintenance, tidying up around the house yard, you know, wetting down all gardens and mulch and everything that we considered could catch fire. So just basic preparedness for if we were impacted by fire.
Now, you said a moment ago that you knew that the Jacobs Spur fire was burning and had been for some time. Did that fire spread such that it got very close to your property in around the 7th or 8th of November?
I think it was prior to that when it spread and came closer. So originally, to give you some perspective, it was in rangeland that was to the west of us, approximately about 10 kilometres west of our property. And I understand that it travelled in an easterly direction as well as a southerly direction from the initial ignition point to within around 5 kilometres of our property. So that was some weeks before the November fire.
And did conditions deteriorate such that the fire started to run in and around the 8th of November?
It was my understanding that there were several fires that actually joined, and I mean, I understand that we're here today in relation to the Karai East fire, and it's my understanding that the Jacobs Spur fire and the Karai East fire became one fire.
You're correct in that understanding.
So,
and they merged around about the 8th or the 9th of November.
Yeah, approximately, yeah.
Yep.
So, but I mean, fires travel in different directions under different conditions. So, unless you're actually there on the day to see what's actually happening, as weather conditions change, fires change their direction. So,
and
yeah, the fire was burning at what we considered a threatening position. So we took appropriate action, what we considered to try, like it might have turned up in a couple of days if the weather turned towards us. So we took what necessary steps we thought were adequate to protect our property. And it's probably a good thing that we did that, because if we hadn't have done it, then we wouldn't have been as prepared as what we were on the 8th of November.
Coming to the 8th, how would you describe the weather conditions firstly on the 8th, Mr. Duff?
Well, they definitely weren't good. Personally myself, I considered that there was no real imminent threat from that fire that was to the west of us at about 20 kilometres. I mean, the Jacobs Spur fire, had sort of settled down and moved off to the south, so it wasn't threatening us because the wind was from the west or a more westerly direction. So that meant that the Carai East fire was more of a concern than what the Jacobs Spur fire was. I've been in fires on worse days as far as temperature goes, but I don't think I've ever witnessed the extremity of the fire that actually impacted on us. It's one of the worst things that I've ever experienced in my life. I've seen a lot of fires in that area because I've lived there and basically worked there on various properties in that area all my life. And fire is a very important tool to us to manage our landscape, to reduce fuel load and manage to protect ourselves and our livelihood, being our stock and our neighbours and everything. So I've never witnessed a situation like that. It was just a one-off. And talking to a lot of people that are older than me, I mean, I've never heard stories about fires that bad being handed down from my grandfather or my great-grandfather, or definitely not from my dad. There's been bad fires, but nothing to compare to what we witnessed on that day.
Are you able to describe those extreme conditions or the extreme behaviour to which you've just referred, so Her Honour has some better insight or understanding as to?
Well, I'll try. Yeah, I'll try. It's a little bit hard to explain, but we can't think of a fire as a fire front in a lineal sense when describing this fire. It was in rangeland to the west of us, which is national park and a lot of heavily timbered grazing country that's privately owned as well. And I think you've probably got to go back to understand the weather conditions in the preceding 3 years leading up to this fire event. I mean, really, it was just a perfect scenario for this fire to do what it did. And if you've ever seen video of some of the fires in the Adelaide Hills, that's probably the best way that I can describe what this fire did and acted in the way that it actually impacted on us. There was no front. There was no fire just coming at us, at what we'd consider a reasonable pace. I mean, we've usually got weeks and then days to take appropriate action. I took a photo off our veranda at approximately 3:15, 3:30 in the afternoon, towards where the Cairo East fire was. And I said to my wife, that thing could be here tomorrow. Well, I didn't realise that the conditions were that way with the wind and the dryness of the vegetation, both bush and grass and understory, that it would be underneath our veranda in less than an hour. So this thing was a firestorm. It was actually above us, and it actually rained fire on top of us, all around us. So everything was on fire at once. I spoke to some of the RFS guys and they said that in their analysis after the event that they thought that the fire was leaping up to 15 kilometres in front of itself, spot fires, and on multiple directions, creating, mini fires within the actual fire itself. So it's a little bit hard to comprehend unless you really go through it, but it was just like being in a war zone and bombs dropping on top of you all over the place, because everything that was all around you just suddenly, all of a sudden, just erupted into flames. The tiniest spark would get in a shrub in the garden, like a bush or a shrub that we might have in the garden, and then it'd just erupt into flames. And you wouldn't think that that green bush would be able to burn. So the conditions were probably only about 38 to 40 degrees Celsius on the day, with a wind of 20 to 30 knots, kilometres per hour. So it was a heavy breeze, but it wasn't a gale. And then the fire itself, when it arrived, it created its own weather system. I did not see lightning, but I definitely heard thunder from the fire itself.
You've mentioned in your statement, Mr. Duff, seeing smoke coming from around Willa. Now that's to the east of your property, and you saw that smoke before your property was impacted by fire. Does that, the evidence you've just given about the RFS informing you that there may have been spotting in the order of 15 kilometres, does that perhaps answer your question that you've posed in your statement as to why Willa was being impacted by fire on that day?
Oh, definitely. As I said, we know the smoke to the east of us, and yet the main fire was still to the west of us. It hadn't come to our property and it hadn't come to our house, and yet to the east of us by 1.5 kilometres or 2 kilometres, there was a raging fire. And I thought, who'd light a fire on a day like today, not knowing that it was spotting from the original fire? Just couldn't comprehend it, couldn't understand it. I understand it now.
Now, you've mentioned some photographs that you took. I might just get those to be displayed now, Mr. Duff, and I'll just get you to... Now, is this a photo that either you or your wife took on the 8th of November?
Yes, that's correct. That's off our back veranda, looking sort of due southwest off our veranda. But that's...
And at this time, is the property under threat? That is immediate threat by ember attack or spotting, or not?
Well, look, I don't know whether we've got a time when that was actually taken, have we?
And I don't believe so.
Yeah, basically that's when we knew we were in trouble. That red that you can see is fire, and you can see some embers there flying above that tree there.
Yes.
So there were pieces of bark and sticks and stuff as big as a biro in length and as big as your index finger, just falling out of the sky that was on fire. I don't know what it was. It was just debris from the fire. And when those things, there were smaller particles as well, it was just like as though the whole air was on fire. It was like as though you grabbed a handful of lawn clippings and threw them at a workshop industrial fan, and when it all came back at you, it was all on fire. That was what the air was like.
And I'll come to that shortly. I'll just go to the next photo, Mr. Duff. Now, which direction are we looking?
I just might need to move a little closer, sorry.
Don't be.
Yeah, no, that's virtually the left-hand side of that photo would be directly west where the Karai fire was. So that's looking in a west-northwest direction from our veranda.
Right.
Yeah, so that's leading up to when we actually got impacted. That's when we knew that we were in trouble, that first photo, when the sky turned red like that.
We'll just move through to the next photograph, Mr. Duff.
Now that's a photo of our front yard in an easterly direction. So there's a road just past where those larger flames are. There's an actual dirt road there. That's our garden fence, that post there near that bush that's on fire. And then the fire's coming towards our house. It's probably only about 10 metres from our veranda there. That's our lawn, that's our front lawn.
And we'll go to the next photo now.
Yeah, that's a bit raw. That's our large machinery shed that was it was on the western side of our house, so probably about 50 to 60 metres from our house. That was a large steel constructed machinery shed. There was no timber structure in that at all, and it was full of probably around $300,000 worth of farming gear. The whole lot was totally destroyed. You can see to the right there's a box trailer, and I think that's the tyres that are actually on fire.
I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Duff. If we go to the next photo, is that?
Yeah, that's to the eastern side of that big large machinery shed. There was an old set of what were dairy bales there that building was probably over 100 years old. We'd converted it into a saddle shed, like for horses and stuff, that had a stable, and there was some saddlery items and that sort of thing stored in there. And it was a small yard, like stockyard out off to the side there, those posts that you can see burning there.
And were you able to save the house, Mr. Duff?
Oh yeah, look, if we hadn't been there, we wouldn't have saved it. My wife was on the veranda with a hose, hosing everything down, and I was underneath it with a hose off a quick spray unit that we had in the back of a Toyota Land Cruiser. And basically on hands and knees and scratching at mulch and stuff to try and keep it away from the garden and the veranda. And yeah, you know you're in trouble when you put it out under your bed.
And have you, in the last couple of years, been able to rebuild and restock to replace those losses you've spoken about?
Look, we've rebuilt to a certain extent. We were underinsured. We didn't have enough insurance to replace everything. But yeah, no, our business has bounced back, and I said that it would probably take us 5 years to get back over the event. So we're still on that path to try and rebuild. We haven't replaced the stock that we lost because they were some of our main core breeder herd. You know, there were generations of genetics there. We're only commercial cattle producers, but they were some of the best cows that we had. Like I said, we've been breeding cattle in the area there for 4 generations. So it was a pretty hard pill to swallow. And
you mentioned earlier problems with breathing. Did you end up having to be hospitalised because of the breathing difficulties that you encountered as a result of the fires?
Well, they said that. I think I was probably emotionally and physically exhausted as well. But yeah, I ended up in hospital only overnight or for a few hours, really. They wanted to keep me in, but I wouldn't let Carolyn go home on her own because it was about a week after the actual fire. But you got to understand, not everything burns all at once. So we lived with that fire and the results of it for approximately a month after. A fire is a funny thing. It doesn't necessarily burn everything at once. And then when the wind had changed or a tree had fallen over or something like that, anything that wasn't burnt would reignite, and then you've got the fire again. We lived in smoke for up to 6 weeks from after that initial blaze went through. So the whole district was just full of smoke. And I mean, we're not the only ones. It was all up and down the east coast. And a lot of people, we suffered, but I really feel for the people, especially Mr. Parsons, who lost his life, and anybody that lost their house. We were blessed, really.
And in terms of doing things better, from your perspective, is there anything that you think can be done better in terms of fire management, given your experience of 30 years on the land in and around that area?
Well, look, it's only my personal opinion, and I'm only, a pretty simple grazier in the district, but I think as a society, we need to learn from the mistakes that we make, and I think that locking up huge, vast amounts of Australian bushland for extended periods of time. When we live in a continent with such variable climatic conditions, I mean, you mentioned there about how we've had rain and we've had, you know, large river rises. Fortunately for us, they weren't as large as what Lismore and up in Queensland went through. But we live in this extreme variability. And I think as a society, we need to take heed and learn from these mistakes that we make. In my opinion, I think that if we'd have been allowed to continue to do what we knew we should be doing, perhaps the fire would not have impacted on us personally as much. And as a community, I think we need to understand that the best weapon that we've got against fire is fire, and it needs to be used in a strategic way. And my grandfather, and to quote him as I did in the statement, he always said, "You either burn it or you'll get burnt." So I don't think locking large areas, this is my personal opinion, of you know, national park or rangeland or bushland up for extended periods of time, not managing it, allowing the fuel load to exceed to where it creates a catastrophic event like this, and that's the only way I can describe it. I think we need to learn from that, and we need as a society to better manage our landscape.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Duff. There may be some other questions, so please bear with us.
Thank you.
Mr. Newton, do you have any questions?
I have no questions, Your Honour.
Mr. Duff, I'd like to thank you as well for giving evidence today, and your description of what you and your wife experienced is just extraordinary, and it obviously would have been incredibly traumatic and difficult. So I really appreciate you sharing that today in these proceedings. Thank you.
No, you're most welcome.
Thank you. You're excused.
Thank you.
Your Honour, the series of photographs that were shown to Mr. Duff are not in the brief. What I propose to do is to obtain copies of those, and at an appropriate time I'll tender those and distribute those to my learned friend. Your Honour, that concludes the inquiry into the Karai Creek fire and the Cairo East fire. Your Honour has the benefit of the documentary material contained within the briefs of evidence for these fires, which are Exhibit 40A and 41A. Your Honour also has the benefit of the oral testimony of the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Senior Constable Simmons, as well as the evidence just now from Mr. David Duff. At a later stage in Your Honour's inquiry into the 2019-2020 bushfire season, those assisting Your Honour will formally address the court on the cause and origin of the Karai Creek and the Cairo East fires. In that regard, I can presently foreshadow, for the benefit of my learned friend, that formal submissions are likely to be made as follows. First, the cause of the Karai Creek fire was a lightning strike on or about 16 October 2019. Secondly, the cause of the Cairo East fire was also a lightning strike on or about 16 October 2019. Thirdly, the origin of the Karai Creek fire was south of an area known as East Kundarang and west of Mary's View, which lies west of the Karai Plateau and east of the Macleay River in the Armidale local government area. And finally, the origin of the Cairo East fire complex was in remote terrain southeast of the Karai Creek fire, west of Kempsey. Your Honour, would Your Honour formally stand these matters over to the 5th of September 2022?
Yes, I do that now. Thank you.
In terms of tomorrow, Your Honour, I will open the inquest into the death of Barry Parsons. Your Honour, there are two witnesses scheduled to give evidence today relating to the Cayenne Road fire. Would Your Honour be minded to take either the lunch adjournment now or a short adjournment to enable those witnesses to be brought into the courtroom?
I'm happy to do either. Is there any preference?
I think they're waiting.
Just a short adjournment.
Just a short adjournment is probably appropriate, Your Honour.
Take a short adjournment. Thank you.
May it please the court.
Silence, please.
Yes, Mr Castleton.
And I call Darryl Aldridge, who I understand is present in the virtual courtroom.
Mr Aldridge, can you see and hear us in the courtroom?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. You'll just hear from the court officer now.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Aldridge.
Mr Aldridge, would you please state your full name
Darryl Andrew Aldridge
and your present work address, please?
is Nambucca Heads Fire Station 397.
And are you a firefighter with Fire and Rescue New South Wales?
I'm a retained firefighter with New South Wales 397 station.
And how long have you been a retained firefighter for?
Currently 5 years.
And were you involved in firefighting activities on the 10th of November 2019?
That's correct, yes.
And were you involved in an incident involving the tanker you were in or the appliance you were in involving a fallen tree?
Correct. Yes, I
Have you, Mr Aldridge, provided a statement in relation to that incident dated the 9th of December 2020?
That's correct.
And do you have a copy of that statement with you this afternoon?
I do in front of me.
Are there any matters that require correction in any way?
No.
Now, can I just ask you firstly why it was you came to be on a property on the 10th of November 2019 undertaking firefighting duties?
We got the call. We put 4 people on the tanker to assist 371 station that had been on the property earlier in the day. And we attended that property to assist them in firefighting duties to protect the property and household.
And was that a property at 50 Coulters Road, North Congarini, if I've pronounced that correctly?
That's correct, sir. Yes, that is the correct address.
And you've mentioned to help 371, is that the Maxville Fire Station?
That's correct. 371 station is Maxville, and they had their tanker on scene when we arrived.
And you were at that time, as you said a moment ago, at the Nambucca Heads Fire Station?
That's correct. 397 at Nambucca Heads.
Now, you were in a tanker which was described as 397 SEV, is that right?
397 Sierra, a service. It's a service vehicle. So if another vehicle in the fleet becomes non-usable, that vehicle is the replacement vehicle while their vehicle's been attended to.
And can you describe that appliance? How many tonnes is it? How much water does it hold?
It holds approximately 3,500 litres of usable water while firefighting. It's an older style tanker. It has 4-wheel drive capability for off-road. It's about 25 years old on the day, I think it was, somewhere around that. What was the other part of the question, sir?
You know how much it weighed, what its tonnage was or not?
It'd be about around a 12-tonne vehicle, gross combined mass.
And in terms of the cabin, how many personnel could it hold?
It's seat belted for 6, sir, if required.
And is that 3 in the front and 3 in the back, or some other configuration?
The configuration's 2 in the front, driver, IC, and then 4 firefighters in the rear if required.
And does this particular appliance have any rollover protection system, to your understanding?
No, it has no rollover protection at all.
To your understanding, did this particular appliance have occupant protection system or not?
Negative, it did not have any occupant protection system in any shape or form.
And to your knowledge, at this time, that is 10 November 2019, did this appliance have any falling object protection system?
No, it did not.
Since the incident, to which I'll come in a moment, has this appliance, or to your knowledge, any other appliance at the Nambucca Fire Station been retrofitted to provide rollover, occupant or falling object protection systems or not?
As far as I'm aware, sir, none of the fleet has been fitted with that type of protection.
Based on your experience as a retained firefighter, have you made any observations of any firefighting appliance having one of those three types of protection systems or not?
The rollover protection or falling object protection, nil. I've never seen any on any appliance within our district.
And in terms of occupant protection system, have you made any observations of any firefighting appliance based on your experience or not?
No, I've never seen them actually implemented. I know that the RFS played with them a few years back, but that was about the only time I've ever heard them talk about that type of thing.
Have you made any observations, Mr. Aldridge, of any rollover protection system or falling object protection system of an RFS appliance or not?
Several years ago, I know that the RFS did a retro fit on one, and they looked at the engineering and what protection it added and the weight and the reduced capability of the carrying capacity of that particular Cat 1 type vehicle. But it was never implemented into service anywhere that I'm aware of.
Now, turning, if we may, to the events of the 10th of November, after you've provided property protection at 50 Coulter Road in North Congarini, did your appliance start to head somewhere else?
We had finished property protection. We'd had an exit strategy due to a fallen tree on the way out, and we were planning to follow 371 up to the tree to remove it from the driveway access point, and we didn't get there.
And what I might do shortly is display some photographs. You were in tanker 397. You were following behind tanker 371. That is the Maxwell appliance, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And did the Maxwell tanker 371 come to a stop to attend to a fallen tree on the road?
Sir, I can't answer that honestly because I didn't actually get to see the tanker in front of us on that day.
Right. Where were you seated in tanker 397? Were you in the front or the rear of the cabin?
I was in the rear cabin behind the driver.
And how long had you been stopped before something happened to your recollection?
It was moments.
And what was your understanding of why it was you came to a stop?
We were asked to deploy to assist 371 in removal of tree limbs from the tree they were cutting up.
And how many other occupants were there in your tanker 397, at this time?
At that time, it was the driver, Les, the IC, Luke, Irene Patros, and myself. So 4 of us, sir.
And was Irene Patros seated in the rear of the cabin with you?
That's correct. She was on the left-hand side behind the IC.
And in terms of personal protective equipment, what PPE were you wearing at this time?
In the vehicle, we had just had our bushfire fighting coat, our dress, drill, pants and boots, and that's all that is required to travel in the rear of the vehicle while attending a incident.
Were you issued with a helmet on this occasion?
I had a helmet available to me and it was there ready to go on once I'd left the cab.
But do I understand your evidence is that I think we've just lost the feed, Mr. Aldridge. If you could repeat your answer, please.
I had no... Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I missed your question. I couldn't hear your question.
You've mentioned that you were issued with a helmet as part of the PPE. Was there any requirement to wear that whilst in situ in the vehicle or not?
No, sir, it's not required to wear in the vehicle. It's believed to be more dangerous than it is to have it on than it is to have it off. So we don't wear them in the cab of the truck.
Now, you mentioned a moment ago that you were tasked to assist in relation to a removal of a tree. Could you just describe, Your Honour, what you were doing when something occurred in relation to you and the vehicle?
Your Honour, basically the truck had come to a stop. I was preparing to undo my seatbelt, grab my helmet, and that's all I can remember. And
that, I take it, is because you suffered some amnesia as a result of the incident, Mr. Aldridge?
Yeah, instantly knocked out and not particularly amnesia, but I don't have any recollection of it because I felt I was not conscious.
What I might do now, Mr. Aldridge, is just show you some photographs of the appliance. I'll just bring that up on the screen. If you have any difficulty seeing these images on the screen, please let Her Honour know. Are they 5 photographs to your understanding of the particular vehicle, appliance 7, tanker 397?
Yes, Your Honour, that's the 397 Tanker Sierra.
And if I understand your evidence correctly, you were seated in the rear of the cabin immediately behind the driver?
That's correct, yes. Yes, behind the driver.
Now, you sustained some injuries, Mr. Aldridge, as a result of that fallen tree incident, I take it?
That's correct.
Now, in terms of matters since the incident, are you aware as to whether or not Fire and Rescue New South Wales have undertaken any investigations in relation to whether or not appliances should have rollover protection or falling object protection, to your understanding, or not?
With all incidents, I believe they investigate them and they put their recommendations forward. But as far as any implementation, I'm not aware it will go ahead.
And have you come to learn since this incident whether or not the incident has become a case study or has been a part of a safety bulletin or any other educational training regime?
I'm aware that there was a case study done. It was plonked on the table at a training evening. We went through it. A bit disappointed in the way it read because I don't believe it was factual. And we weren't actually involved in any of that. It was done through persons higher than us.
What part of that bulletin or case study did you consider was not factual?
I haven't seen it since, sir, and it was nearly 2.5 years ago. I can't recollect, but we were very put off by what was written in there.
Are you able to shed any light on what aspect of it had you or other members put off?
It sort of referred that we weren't following protocol and practice, following laces. And I believe we were to a degree. It may have changed slightly on our exit strategy, but we did actually follow protocol as we would normally would on exit. The variation on it, I can't actually remember 100%, but yeah, it was off-putting at the time when I read it. And to be honest, I stopped reading it because it's just upsetting me. So yeah, literally pushed it aside and said, yeah, whatever. Sorry about that.
In terms of the incident itself, that is the tree coming down, what, if any, recollection do you have now of there being a warning that this tree was going to come down, or did it just happen in a split second?
With any bushfire that had been going over 24, 36 hours, you've got always the potential for trees to continue to fall down. We'd observed a few trees leaning on each other on the way in on the day, and noted they would be potential fall into path possibility if it happened. We also had the helicopters working in and around us, putting out hot spots on those trees. The force of the water hit from the helicopter dropping the water on in those areas weakened those trees considerably. So they're things that would be taken into account when we design an exit strategy from that place. Yeah, that's about all.
Have you encountered a fallen tree on an appliance previously, or is this the first time that you've encountered such an event?
For myself personally, it's the first time I've ever seen this event.
Are you aware of any other occurrences of trees coming down on appliances?
Yes, previously I'm RFS for 15 years. I've done a few strike teams away in Victoria and a few other strike places. And we had an incident where a CFA vehicle had a tree collapse on top of it. Nobody was injured, but the vehicle was destroyed on the day.
And CFA, what does that stand for the uninitiated?
That's Country Victoria's Fire Association.
Your Honour, that concludes my examination of Mr Aldridge.
Thank you. Mr Aldridge, if you wouldn't mind just waiting a moment, we'll see if there's any other questions. Mr Newton.
Your Honour, I have no questions.
Thanks very much, Mr Aldridge, for giving your evidence today. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Excused.
Your Honour, the next and final witness is Mr Luke Rushton, who I understand is also in the virtual waiting room. If Mr Rushton could be brought in, please. And I call Mr Rushton.
Mr Rushton, can you see and hear us in the courtroom?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. We'll just hear from the court officer now.
Silence, please. Do you solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you, Mr Rushton.
Mr Rushton, would you please state your full name?
Luke Thomas Rushton,
And your present work address, please?
371 Fire and Rescue, Maxville.
And are you presently employed as a retained firefighter with the Fire and Rescue New South Wales?
That is correct.
And are you stationed at Maxville or somewhere else?
That is correct. I am at Maxville now.
In November of 2019, were you stationed at Nambucca Heads?
No, I was stationed at Maxwell. We were responded to do a standby at 235 Barraville, as they were currently out doing bushfire related incidents.
You've provided, have you not, a statement of the 9th, I think it's the 9th of October 2020, totalling 6 pages.
Yes, that's correct.
And do you have a copy of that statement, Mr. Rushton, with you this afternoon?
I do.
Have you read it recently?
Yes, I have.
Are there any matters that require correction in any way or not?
No.
Now, returning to the 10th of November 2019, what was your role as a retained firefighter on that day?
So that day I was in the backseat of our tanker 371. What got responded to do a standby at Barraville 397. Over Barraville Fire Station, as they were currently out doing other duties. So we have to sit at the station in case any other jobs come in.
And were you assigned to undertake property protection at a property at 50 Coulters Road, Congarini?
Yes, so we got activated from Barraville Fire Station to attend the fire incident, where we actually got tasked to do property protection at a property close to 50 Coulters Road. Once we arrived on scene, the landowner was in a good position, had earth moving equipment arrived, so we weren't required there. That's where we got reassigned to attend 50 Coulters Road, Congarini.
And when you got to 50 Coulters Road, at some point whilst you were there, did the Nambucca Heads Tanker 397 arrive?
Yes, so we started doing property protection, and probably about half an hour after arriving on scene, Nambucca arrived.
And after Fire and Rescue New South Wales had completed the property protection and you were heading or exiting the property, did an incident occur involving a fallen tree?
Yeah, so as we finished up doing property protection, we packed up all our gear, we boarded the appliances, started heading up the driveway, got to about 100 metres approximately up the driveway where we had found a fallen tree. One of our crew jumped out with the chainsaw ready to start chopping up the tree, while the other crew assisted him.
Were you in the lead vehicle, Tanker 371, at that time?
Correct.
And where were you positioned in the lead tanker on this occasion?
So there was 5 of us in 371 tanker. I was in the back seat behind the driver.
Now, when your tanker, that's the Maxwell Tanker 371, came to a halt, was the purpose for the stopping to enable the occupants such as yourself to alight the tanker and undertake tree removal?
Yes, so when we arrived there, the tree was blocking the road. We had to remove the tree so we could continue exiting the property.
And that was to be done by way of chainsaw?
Yes, there was 2 chainsaw operators on board. One of them got chainsaw out and got started ready to start assessing the tree and chopping it into small enough pieces where the rest of the crew could move it off the road.
Now, in terms of the Nambucca Heads Tanker 397, where was it in comparison to your tanker? Was it following behind or somewhere else?
So as we hopped out, we were assessing the tree. Tanker 397 came from the rear from the property, came up and stopped about 10 metres behind our tanker.
And at some point, did something happen involving a tree and Tanker 397 from your observations?
So as they pulled up, as we were assessing the tree had fallen down, we heard a large cracking noise, and before we could identify where the tree was, quite a large eucalyptus tree, I think it was, fell down onto the cab of 397 Sierra.
And did you see that occur? the tree coming down onto the cabin of the appliance?
Yes, I did.
And at that stage, had anyone alighted tanker 397 or not?
There was not enough time. There was literally seconds between hearing the first crack and the tree crashing onto the appliance.
And can I ask you this, at this point in time, November 2019, how long had you been a retained firefighter for?
I was currently at that time, I was for 5 years.
And had you at any time before that been a member of any local rural fire brigade or not?
No.
In that 5 years that you'd been employed as a fire and rescue retained firefighter, Mr. Rushton, had you ever seen a tree come down on an appliance before?
No.
Have you seen one come down on an appliance since?
No, not in person.
Have you come to learn by other means that trees have come down on other appliances or not?
Like I've seen on social media and media of appliances with limbs have fallen on them, but I have not seen it in person.
Yes. And since this incident, have you made any observations of any fire and rescue appliance or tanker that has had fitted rollover protection systems or not?
No, as far as I'm aware, there is none in New South Wales.
And what about occupant protection systems? Are you aware of any occupant protection systems?
No, none either.
And finally, since this incident, are you aware of there being fixed to any fire and rescue New South Wales appliance falling object protection systems?
No.
Since this incident, has there been any additional training or education, to your knowledge, around the hazards of falling trees onto appliances or not?
So after our incident, we did find on the internet, on our fire and rescue intranet page, a case study of falling trees while during bushfires. We just stumbled across that when we were doing training. So there is a case study, and we have had someone come and talk to us about I think it was an ICAD investigation about it, but that case study is the only formal training I'm aware of.
And is that case study based on this particular incident that occurred on the 10th of November 2019?
Yes, it is.
And since the incident, have you been made aware of there being a safety bulletin in relation to the incident that occurred on the 10th of November 2019?
I believe so, but I'm not positive on that one, sorry.
You've not seen one yourself?
I cannot recall, sorry.
Do you recall there being any additional training or education around that topic, that safety bulletin, to which you have some vague recollection of hearing about?
We might have done it in-house. I'm not certain it's across the board. I know we have spoken about at our normal drills and things like about how we need to keep more aware of fallen items and fallen trees and things like that. But I'm not quite sure across the state.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rushton. That concludes my examination, Your Honour.
You wouldn't mind waiting a moment, Mr. Rushton? I'll see if there's any other questions. Mr. Newton?
Your Honour, I have no questions.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mr. Rushton, for making yourself available today to give evidence.
Thank you.
You're excused now. Thank you.
Your Honour, Ms. Irene Patchos, who was one of the occupants of the Nambucca Heads appliance, was scheduled to give evidence today. Unfortunately, she's unavailable today. Inquiries are being made as to whether she's available this week or next. Could I ask, Your Honour, just to stand over Hard Heard, the Cayenne Road inquiry until we know when Ms. Irene Patchos is available to give evidence?
Certainly, I'll do that now.
Your Honour, that concludes the evidence today. Tomorrow, Your Honour, I'll open the inquest into the death of Barry Parsons.
All right, thank you, Mr Castleton. We'll adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow.